Let me ask you something. If a man killed his own brother, poisoned him slowly, paid the doctor to write cardiac arrest on the certificate, and then stood in the dead man's parlor, holding the widow while she wept, how would anyone ever catch him? Nobody saw it. Nobody suspected it. The paperwork was clean. The doctor was paid to be certain, and he was certain. Except that man made one mistake, and he made it 3 days before the funeral, in a dark hallway, on a phone call he thought no one could hear. "My brother is gone," he said. "The only question left is who inherits the silence." He didn't look down the hallway when he said it. Why would he? It was past midnight. The house was asleep. But listen to me. At the bottom of those stairs, in the dark, hugging his knees, there was a 9-year-old boy who had come down for a glass of water. And that boy heard everything. 3 days later, in front of 200 mourners, that child threw himself onto his father's casket and refused to let it go into the ground. And what he screamed across that open grave forced an autopsy nobody wanted and destroyed the man in the dark glasses standing on the other side of it. You're about to watch a 9-year-old take down a killer that every adult in Atlanta believed was a good man. Stay with me. To understand what happened in that cemetery, you need to understand 2 brothers. So come back with me, 11 years, to the day the younger one landed in Atlanta. Obinna Eze arrived from Enugu with an engineering degree, $400, and the kind of stubborn patience that builds things. His older brother Ikenna was already here, 8 years established, loud, connected, the kind of man who knew a guy for everything and owned nothing outright. Ikenna picked Obinna up from the airport in a leased Mercedes he introduced as mine, and that one word, if you were listening closely, was the whole story of Ikenna Eze. Everything was mine. Very little was paid for. Now here is where I need you to pay attention, because this is where the poison actually started, years before any bottle was opened. Obinna worked. You know the type. Maybe you are the type. Warehouse shifts, then a forklift certification, then a logistics job, then a small trucking contract of his own. In 11 years, the younger brother built what the older brother had spent 20 years performing. A real company. Eze Freight and Storage. 14 trucks. 2 warehouses off Fulton Industrial. A house in a good school district. A wife named Ngozi who taught chemistry at a community college. And a son, Chidera, Chidi, who was 9 years old and worshipped his father the way boys do, completely and without inspection. And Ikenna? Ikenna smiled at every family gathering, gave the loudest toasts, called Obinna my success story. I brought him here, and went home each night to leased furniture and 3 maxed cards, and a private ledger of resentment that grew a line longer every time somebody praised his little brother. Let me show you the exact night the ledger tipped over, because these things always have a night. 2 years before the funeral, Obinna threw a party for the 10th anniversary of Eze Freight. Rented hall, live band, the whole Igbo community of Atlanta in their finest. And near the end of the evening, a visiting chief from Enugu, an old man with a red cap and the kind of voice that makes rooms rearrange themselves, stood up to give the final toast. He praised Obinna for 10 straight minutes. The humility, the work, the forklift years. This, the old man said, lifting his glass, is what a man looks like. Then, turning warmly, meaning absolutely nothing by it, he gestured to the brother standing beside the guest of honor and asked, in front of 400 people, "And you, elder one, remind me, what is it that you do?" 400 people, a live band that had just gone quiet between songs, and Ikenna Eze, 50 years of performance behind him, opened his mouth and discovered there was nothing true he could put in it. Someone laughed, not cruelly, just filling the silence, and the old chief moved on, and the band started again, and the moment was over for everybody in that hall except one man. Obinna never even noticed. That is the terrible part. He was embracing someone across the room. The wound that killed him was inflicted at his own party, at his own celebration, in a moment he never saw. And the man who received it stood there smiling, glass raised, already somewhere else entirely. Already, if we are honest about it, in the kitchen of his brother's house on some future Sunday, holding a container of soup. Ask yourself something. Honestly, have you ever watched someone smile at a person they hate? Would you recognize it? Because 200 people watched Ikenna Eze smile at his brother for 11 years, and not one of them recognized it. One person eventually would. He was 3 feet 10 inches tall. 8 months before the funeral, Obinna made his brother the office manager of Eze Freight. Ngozi was against it. She never said why in front of the family. You don't in an Igbo family, not about your husband's senior brother, but she said it to Obinna in the kitchen, quietly. Your brother counts your things when he visits. I have watched his eyes. A man who counts your things is taking inventory. Obinna laughed. Kind men always laugh at the exact warning that would save them. He is my brother. No. Blood does not poison blood. Remember that sentence. It is going to cost him everything. Because within 4 months, Ikenna, now inside the company, inside the accounts, inside the insurance paperwork, had learned 2 things. 1. His brother's business was worth just over $4 million with the warehouses. 2. His brother had a key man life insurance policy and a will that left everything to Ngozi and Chidi, unless Ngozi was unable or unfit, in which case guardianship of the estate passed to the nearest adult relative, to him. And the third thing Ikenna learned, from a man he knew, because Ikenna always knew a guy, was the name of a compound. Slow, cumulative, nearly tasteless in pepper soup, something that, given patiently over weeks to a man with long work hours and a bad diet, looks exactly like a heart giving up. The symptoms started in March. Fatigue Obinna blamed on the new contracts. Numbness in his fingers he blamed on the forklift years. 2 collapses he refused to call collapses. And every Sunday, every single Sunday, his loving elder brother came to the house carrying pepper soup from a place you must try, and sat with him, and watched him eat it, and asked warmly about his health. I want to put you inside one of those Sundays because a 9-year-old was inside all of them. Picture the kitchen. Late April. Obinna at the table. Thinner than Christmas. A blanket over his knees in a warm room. That detail alone should have alarmed somebody. Ikenna ladling the soup himself, always himself, into his brother's bowl, talking the whole time, loud and warm, about contracts and church and nothing. Ngozi grading papers in the next room, and Chidi at the counter with his homework, watching, the way children watch, without agenda, without theory, just collecting. And here is what the boy collected, week after week, and filed away without knowing he was filing it. Uncle brought the soup, and Uncle served the soup, and Uncle praised the soup. This place, Obi, I'm telling you, best pepper soup in Atlanta. And Uncle never, not once, in 14 Sundays, ate the soup. Uncle, you're not having some. Ah, engineer. Ikenna had stolen even the nickname. I ate before I came. This is for your daddy. It's building him back up. Building him back up. The boy accepted it, because children accept, and went back to his homework. But the file stayed open somewhere behind his eyes. Weeks later, in a dark hallway, with a phone call pouring into his ears, that file would spring open, and every Sunday would reorganize itself in a single second into what it had always actually been. That is how children work, if you have forgotten. They do not understand in the moment. They understand all at once, later, and completely. On the 9th of June, Obinna Eze died in his own bed at 47 years old. The doctor who examined him, Dr. Kwabena Osei, a family acquaintance Ikenna had personally recommended when Obinna's old physician retired, signed the certificate within hours. Cardiac arrest. Natural causes. No autopsy required, and none requested. You already know why the doctor was so quick. You heard the phone call. You have been paid to be certain. So be certain. But I want you to sit with what that week was like for the 2 people who didn't know. A widow who could not stop replaying every meal, every symptom, every "I'm fine" nuggo, and a 9-year-old boy who had watched his giant of a father shrink for 3 months, and now could not sleep, could not eat, and came downstairs at midnight, 3 days before the funeral, for a glass of water. His father used to bring him one every night, set it on the nightstand, tap the rim twice, say, "Drink, engineer." Nobody had brought him water since the 9th of June, so he went down for it himself. And in the dark hallway off the parlor, he heard his uncle's voice, low, calm, terrible, inheriting the silence. Now put yourself in that boy's body, because this is the part adults get wrong. You are 9. You have just heard something your mind cannot hold. You do not have the words, death certificate, insurance, guardianship, mean nothing to you. But you understood 3 things with total clarity. The doctor was paid, the paper is a lie, and uncle did something to daddy. So what do? Exactly what Chidi did. You tell your mother. And here is the tragedy. His mother believed him and could not afford to. Understand the difference. Ngozi looked at her son's shaking hands, and something cold walked down her back, because it fit. The Sunday soups, the collapses, the speed of that certificate. But she was a widow of 5 days in a house full of her husband's family, in a community already whispering, and the man her son was accusing was the eldest brother, the one running the funeral, the one signing the papers. Accuse him with nothing but a child's midnight memory? They would say grief had broken her. They would say she was poisoning the boy against the family. And Ikenna, she saw this clearly, Ikenna would use it. Unfit, unstable, guardianship to the nearest adult relative. So she knelt, held her son's face, and made the second worst decision of her life, for the best reason in the world. Chidi! Listen to Mummy. Say nothing. Not yet. Mummy will find a way, but if you say this out loud in this house, we will lose everything. Do you hear me? Say nothing. 3 days. That boy carried it. Watch him carry it. Through the wake, where his uncle squeezed his shoulder and called him the man of the house now. Through the church service, where his uncle gave a eulogy so beautiful that strangers wept, and the boy sat in the front pew, staring at him, with an expression everyone read as grief. It was not grief. It was arithmetic. A 9-year-old doing the only math that mattered. Once the ground closes, it is finished. Even a child knows what burial means. It means the evidence goes into the earth. If you have ever known the truth about someone, known it in your bones, and watched every adult in the room smile at that person, then you know exactly what was building inside this child. And if you know that feeling, do one thing for me right now. Subscribe and turn the bell on. Because this channel is where the truth stops staying quiet. And what this boy does in the next 60 seconds is the reason you'll want the next story too. Now, the cemetery. Grey sky. 200 mourners in black on wet green grass. White lilies on mahogany. The minister's voice rolling through the committal. Ashes to ashes. And the casket resting on the lowering frame above the open grave. Ngozi stood at the graveside, with her son's hand locked in hers, and I want you to know, she was holding it for a reason. She had felt him vibrating all morning. Twice at the church he had looked at her, and twice she had shaken her head. Not here, not now, Mummy will find a way. But Mummy will find a way is an adult promise on an adult clock, and the men from the funeral home had just stepped forward to the crank handles. The frame clicked. The casket shivered. It began, by 1 inch, to descend. And Chidera Eze tore his hand out of his mother's hand and threw himself onto his father's casket. No, you can't put him in the ground. They killed my daddy. 200 people stopped breathing at once. The minister's book sagged in his hands. And the boy, 9 years old, black suit too big at the shoulders, tears cutting his face, spread his whole small body across the lid like a shield, twisted, and pointed one arm straight across the open grave. At his uncle. I heard him. 3 days ago, at night, on the phone, he said the doctor was paid. He said the certificate will keep saying heart attack. He said, and the boy's voice cracked and came back louder, word for word, the sentence that had been burning through him for 3 days. He said, the only question left is who inherits the silence. I need you to picture Ikenna Eze in this moment, because 200 other people were. He did not move. That was the mistake. An innocent man erupts. What is this child saying? An innocent man grieves, protests, weeps. Ikenna Eze stood on the far side of his brother's grave in his dark glasses and his good black coat, and he went perfectly, unnaturally still, one gloved hand slowly crushing the funeral program. Because killers don't plan for this. There is no rehearsal for a child quoting you across an open grave. 4 full seconds of silence. Then he found his voice, and it was smooth, and it was almost right. The boy is destroyed by grief. Somebody, Ngozi, please, control your son. Let my brother be buried with dignity. And that word, control, did something Ikenna did not intend. Because Ngozi Eze had spent 3 days being controlled by fear and 5 months being controlled by politeness, and she looked at her son spread across his father's casket, all alone on the lid of it, being the only brave person in a cemetery full of adults, and she walked forward, and instead of pulling her son off the casket, she put her hand on it beside his. Then let it be dignity, she said, and her teacher's voice carried to the last row of mourners. Nobody buries my husband today. I am requesting an autopsy. You could hear the wind. Somewhere in the crowd, an old woman said, Chineke, God, into her hands. And Ikenna Eze, elder of the family, master of every room he had ever entered, made his second mistake in front of 200 witnesses. He argued, too fast, too hard, too specifically. An autopsy is an abomination. The certificate is signed. The doctor is certain. You will not cut my brother open because a child had a nightmare. Ask yourself, who fights that hard to keep a body in the ground? 200 people were quietly asking the same thing. And you could watch the answer move through that crowd like weather. The funeral home men were the first. Professionals, they had seen every kind of graveside grief there is, and some instinct older than their training made both of them step back from the crank handles at the same moment, hands off, out of it. Then the minister closed his book. Not slammed it, closed it, gently, the way you close a door on a room you will come back to, and said, to no one and everyone, perhaps we are not finished asking God's questions today. An old woman near the front, nobody ever established which family she belonged to, said out loud what half the cemetery was thinking. Since when does an innocent man argue against the truth being checked? And Ikenna heard the weather change. You could see him hear it. The smooth voice made one more attempt. This family will regret this circus. But the word circus, spoken across his own brother's casket, at a boy still lying on the lid of it, landed so badly that even his own allies looked at their shoes. He straightened his coat. He announced that he would not stand there and be insulted by a hysterical household, and he walked to his car through 200 people, every one of whom stepped back to let him pass, and not one of whom said his name. Understand what happened in that gap between the headstones. He arrived at that cemetery as the head of the family. He left it as a suspect. No charge had been filed. No test had been run. A 9-year-old and a widow's flat, steady voice had done in 4 minutes what it would take the state of Georgia another 19 days to put on paper. The burial was suspended that afternoon. Let me walk you through the collapse, step by step, because the collapse is the part you came for, and it is procedural, and procedure does not cry, and procedure does not forgive. The medical examiner's office took the body that week. In Georgia, a widow's request plus alleged witness testimony of foul play is enough, and a family attorney Ngozi hired with her own savings made sure it was more than enough. The toxicology panel took 19 days. 19 days during which Ikenna called Ngozi every single evening. Warm, wounded, reasonable. Sister, end this madness. Think of the family name. Think of what you are teaching the boy. On day 11, the calls changed flavor. Grief makes women imagine things, Ngozi. Judges know this. Be careful what you make yourself look like. Ngozi recorded every call. Chemistry teachers are careful people. And understand, the calls were the gentle part. The community was the siege. Because Ikenna had spent those 19 days working the room the way he had worked rooms his whole life. And the room, at first, worked. Aunties arrived at Ngozi's door in delegations of 3, wrapped in good intentions and better jellies. Our daughter, this is not how we mourn. You are shaming his memory. Let the man rest. At church, conversations went quiet when she entered and resumed, adjusted, when she passed. One elder told her, to her face, with genuine kindness, that a woman who cuts her husband open on the word of a child would carry the mark of it forever. She carried it. She dropped Chidi at school every morning through all 19 days and taught her classes and graded her papers and said thank you, Ma, and yes, Ma, and we will see, Ma, and did not withdraw the request. If you have ever stood alone inside a crowd that loves the person destroying you, truly alone, with only a 9-year-old certain you are right, then you know what those 19 days cost. If you haven't, I hope you never learn. Day 19. The report. Thallium. Cumulative exposure consistent with repeated dosing over 10 to 14 weeks. Concentrations in the hair shaft that read like a calendar, spiking, if you laid it against the dates, every single week, every Sunday. Cardiac arrest, the certificate said. The certificate had been paid to say it. The homicide detectives went to Dr. Kwabena Osei first, and this is the thing about hired certainty. It is only certain while it is cheap. Faced with a toxicology report, a suspended burial, and the words, accessory after the fact, the doctor's certainty lasted 40 minutes. He gave them everything, the approach, the amount, $30,000, the burner number, and the voice on it. He surrendered his license on the spot and took a cooperation deal like a drowning man takes a rope. The burner number's records aligned with a call made at 12:04 a.m., 3 days before the funeral, from the hallway of a grieving house. At the exact minute, a 9-year-old boy stood at the bottom of the stairs, holding nothing but the truth and an empty glass. They arrested Ikenna Eze on a Tuesday morning at the leased Mercedes, in front of the leased condo, with the maxed cards in his wallet. Murder in the first degree, insurance fraud, attempted obstruction. At trial, his lawyers tried grief, then conspiracy, then, and I want you to remember this about men like Ikenna, they tried blaming the widow. The jury was out for 4 hours. There was one moment at that trial I have to give you, because the jurors gave it to reporters afterward, all of them, independently. The prosecution called Chidera Eze, 10 years old by then. He walked to the stand in the same black suit from the funeral. His mother had offered to buy a new one. He had refused, and no one pressed him on why. The prosecutor asked him gently to tell the court what he heard on the night of the phone call. And the boy did something no one had prepared, not even his own side. He closed his eyes first. Then he recited it. Not remembered it. Recited it. The way you recite something that has been playing in your head every night for a year. The certificate says cardiac arrest. It will keep saying cardiac arrest. You have been paid to be certain, so be certain. My brother is gone. The only question left is who inherits the silence. He opened his eyes, and then, nobody asked him to, he looked across the courtroom, directly at the defense table, at the man who was no longer allowed to wear dark glasses indoors, and he said the only unscripted sentence of his testimony. You forgot I was there. I'm always there. The defense objected. It didn't matter. Some sentences cannot be struck from a human being, whatever the record says. The jury was out for 4 hours, and several of them admitted the deliberation only took that long because of the paperwork. Life. No parole eligibility for 30 years. He was 49 years old, and here is the detail the whole courtroom remembered. When the verdict was read, the bailiff made him remove the dark glasses. 200 people at a graveside never saw his eyes. 12 jurors did. Several of them said afterward it was the only moment he looked afraid. Dr. Osei, 8 years, medical license permanently revoked, name published by the state board. Lighter, because he flipped, and heavier than he dreamed, because I only signed a paper, is not a sentence that survives a dead man's hair. Nobody wrote to anybody. Nobody was forgiven. Ngozi did not attend the sentencing. She was teaching that day, because her students had an exam, and because Ikenna Eze had already taken enough of her calendar. So what happened to the boy? Come with me, 1 year forward, because you have earned the ending, and so has he. Ease Freight and Storage runs today with Ngozi as its owner, and a manager Obinna himself had trained, the company Ikenna killed for, working peacefully for the family he tried to steal it from. The house is loud again, slowly. Chidi is 10 now. He sleeps with the light off again, most nights. And every Sunday, the day his uncle used to bring the soup, Ngozi drives her son to a green cemetery on the east side of Atlanta, to a black granite headstone that finally, honestly, tells the truth about how a good man died and who loved him. The boy does the same thing every week. He fills a small cup at the tap by the cemetery gate, carries it 200 yards without spilling, and sets it at the base of his father's stone. Then he taps the rim twice. Drink, engineer. His father used to bring him water every night. Now the boy brings it back. That is the whole transaction of love, if you ask me. It always comes back, even across the ground, even after everything. Here is what I want to leave with you, and I am talking to you directly now. Every adult at that funeral had the same information available: the sudden death, the convenient certificate, the brother who arrived too smoothly at the center of everything. 200 grown people, and the only one who acted was the one with no money, no power, no vocabulary, and no doubt. Children are not braver than us because they know less. They are braver than us because they have not yet learned to price the truth, what it costs, who it offends, what it makes us look like. Somewhere along the way, you and I learned to do that math. That boy hadn't. That's the only difference, and it was the difference between a killer inheriting silence and a killer inheriting a cell. So the next time a small voice in your house says something that makes the room go cold, do not rush to teach it the math. Listen first. The smallest witness in the room is very often the only one not lying to himself. This story, like every story on this channel, is a work of fiction. The people, the names, the events. The lesson is yours to keep. Now talk to me, because I read every single comment. Which moment will stay with you? The phone call in the dark hallway, the boy's body spread across that casket, the widow putting her hand on the lid beside his, or 2 words at a graveside: drink, engineer. And if this story held you, subscribe and turn on the bell. The next one is already being written, and in that one too, somebody thinks nobody heard them. Somebody always hears. All stories on this channel are fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, real events, or real places is entirely coincidental.